I knew I was being fired the second Victor Hale's expression didn't change when I walked into the conference room. He sat across from Bethany Peters from HR, both of them wearing the same rehearsed look of professional concern. The kind of look people practice in mirrors before delivering bad news. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped rubber bands around my lungs. Victor slid a folder across the table, his fingers leaving no prints on the glossy surface. He was too careful for that. "Madeline," he said, his voice smooth as glass, "we need to discuss your performance on the Clearwater project." I knew right then my job was already gone. The way Bethany wouldn't meet my eyes. The way Victor's smirk lingered just a fraction too long. This wasn't a performance review. This was a staged execution. "You missed the deadline," he continued, tapping the folder. "Significantly." I stared at the papers in front of me. My hands started to shake, so I pressed them flat against the table. The deadline he was citing was 3 weeks earlier than the original date. 3 weeks that had vanished like smoke. 6 weeks earlier, everything had been different. Victor had called me into his office with that fake warmth he reserved for moments when he needed something. His corner office overlooked the city, floor-to-ceiling windows that made him look like a king surveying his kingdom. "Madeline," he'd said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk, "I have something special for you." He slid a project brief across the mahogany surface. The Clearwater account, our biggest client. The kind of project that could define a career, launch a promotion, cement a legacy. "This is huge," Victor had said, leaning back in his chair. "I specifically requested you for this. You're the only one I trust to handle something this important." I'd felt flattered, proud even. Looking back now, I could see the trap being set, but in that moment, all I saw was opportunity. Victor had smiled that practiced smile, the one that never reached his eyes. "Timeline is aggressive but manageable. 12 weeks. You'll have full support from the team." I remember nodding, already mentally organizing the workflow, excited about the challenge ahead. The first sign came 2 days later. I sent an email requesting the design team's bandwidth for the initial mock-ups. No response. I sent a follow-up the next morning. Still nothing. By the end of the week, I'd scheduled 3 planning meetings with key stakeholders. All 3 were cancelled last minute. No explanation. Just calendar notifications vanishing from my screen like they'd never existed. I walked to Victor's office to ask about resources. His door was open, but when he saw me approaching, something shifted in his expression. "Madeline," he said, not inviting me to sit. "Problem. I'm having trouble connecting with the design team," I explained. "The project launches in 10 weeks and I need to start coordinating." Victor waved his hand dismissively. "You don't need to micromanage everyone. You're capable of handling this independently. That's why I chose you." The words sounded like praise, but they felt like a door closing. I left his office with a knot forming in my stomach. Something was off. The resources I'd been promised were evaporating. Emails went unanswered. People suddenly became unavailable. I was being isolated, systematically cut off from the support I needed. And Victor was watching it happen with that same blank expression. The following Monday, Victor called me into another meeting. This time, a woman I'd never seen before sat in the visitor chair. She was younger than me, dressed in that startup casual way that screamed contractor. "Madeline, this is Carla Hoffman," Victor said. "She's going to assist with Clearwater. Just to take some pressure off your plate." Assist. The word felt wrong immediately. Over the next week, I realized Carla wasn't assisting anything. She was learning my role. Every conversation was an interrogation disguised as collaboration. "How do you usually structure the client presentations?" she'd ask. "What's your process for stakeholder approval? Who has final sign-off on deliverables?" These weren't questions an assistant would ask. These were questions a replacement would ask. I trained her on workflows I'd spent years developing. I shared templates, strategies, institutional knowledge that couldn't be found in any manual. The whole time something gnawed at my gut. One afternoon, Carla's laptop was angled toward me during a video call. I saw an email subject line. Transition timeline, confidential. My name wasn't in the recipient list. That evening she let something slip. Victor mentioned this assignment is temporary, she said casually. For you, I mean. Just until the project stabilizes. I couldn't sleep that night. 2 a.m, I opened my laptop and pulled up the project timeline. The master document that outlined every milestone, every deliverable, every deadline. I scrolled down to the final delivery date. My blood went cold. The date had changed. It was no longer 12 weeks from the kickoff meeting. It was 9 weeks. 3 weeks had been shaved off without warning, without approval, without any communication trail. I searched my email for any mention of the change. Nothing. I checked the shared project drive for revision history. The document showed it had been edited 4 days ago. By Victor. My hands were shaking as I took screenshots. Every page. Every detail. The original timeline. The modified version. The edit history showing Victor's name. I created a folder on my personal cloud drive and uploaded everything. Dates, emails, calendar invites, resource requests that had gone ignored. I wasn't building a case. I was building a life raft. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with Victor to discuss the timeline discrepancy. He accepted the meeting, then canceled it an hour before with no explanation. The pattern was becoming clear. I was being erased in real time. The public humiliation came during the monthly leadership meeting. 20 people gathered in the main conference room, including executives I'd never worked with directly. Victor was presenting quarterly progress updates when he stopped on a slide featuring the Clearwater project. I want to address some concerns, he said. His voice taking on that performative gravity that managers use when they're about to throw someone under the bus. He turned to me. Madeline, can you update everyone on where we stand with deliverables? Every eye in the room shifted to me. I felt my face flush. I pulled up my notes and began explaining the progress, the challenges with resources, the timeline concerns. Victor interrupted me mid-sentence. I think what Madeline is trying to say is that she's struggling to keep pace. The room went silent. Struggling. The word hung in the air like an accusation. I've noticed some concerning patterns, Victor continued. His tone measured and calm. Missed check-ins. Delayed communications. I'm worried about her ability to manage a project of this scope. I wanted to scream. I wanted to show everyone the evidence of his sabotage. Instead, I stayed calm. I've documented all my progress and challenges, I said quietly. Happy to share that with anyone. Victor smiled that cold smile. Of course. We're all here to support you. After the meeting, someone messaged me privately. That wasn't fair. Sleep became impossible. I'd wake up at 3 a.m, replaying conversations word by word. Had I misunderstood Victor's intentions? Was I overreacting? Maybe I really was struggling. Maybe I wasn't good enough. The doubt crept in like poison. I started questioning everything. My competence, my memory, my judgment. During the day, I'd catch myself staring at my computer screen, unable to focus. The confidence I'd spent years building was crumbling. One morning, I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes before going inside. I didn't want to face Victor. I didn't want to see that smirk. I felt like I was drowning and everyone was standing on the shore watching. That weekend, I spread every document across my kitchen table. Project briefs, email chains, calendar screenshots, timeline revisions. I compared dates, cross-referenced conversations, mapped out the pattern of isolation and sabotage. I wasn't imagining it. The evidence was overwhelming. Victor had been systematically undermining me from the beginning. This wasn't about performance. This was about manufacturing a reason to fire me. I took a deep breath and made a decision. I would document everything. Not to fight. Not to win. Just to survive. I created a detailed timeline with dates, names, and facts. No emotions. No accusations. Just the truth, laid out chronically in black and white. Monday morning, I submitted a formal workload summary to HR. 3 pages. Single-spaced. Every dependency listed. Every resource request documented. Every timeline change noted with dates and revision history. I didn't accuse Victor of anything. I didn't mention sabotage or discrimination. I just presented facts. Project assigned, April 3rd. Original deadline, June 26th. Resources promised but never allocated. Design team unresponsive as of April 5th. Timeline changed without notification, May 1st. New deadline, June 5th. I attached screenshots of everything. The original project brief. The modified timeline showing Victor's edits. Emails that had gone unanswered. Meeting cancellations. I felt sick hitting send. This wasn't how I operated. I wasn't someone who went to HR. I wasn't someone who made waves. But I also wasn't going to let Victor destroy me without leaving a record. Bethany Peters responded 2 hours later. 1 sentence. Noted. That was it. No acknowledgement of the evidence. No follow-up questions. Just 1 word that told me everything I needed to know. HR wasn't going to help me. They were part of the machinery designed to protect the company, not the employee. I was on my own. The trap was closing and I had no way to stop it. All I could do was make sure there was a record of how I ended up inside it. 3 days later, Victor scheduled an impromptu check-in. No agenda. No warning. Just a calendar invite that appeared on my screen 15 minutes before the meeting. I walked into his office with my stomach in knots. He was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city like a man without a care in the world. "Sit," he said without turning around. "Sat." Victor turned slowly. His expression unreadable. "I wanted to talk about your recent email to HR." My heart stopped. "It was very thorough," he continued. "Very detailed. I appreciate your commitment to documentation." He sat down across from me, leaning back in his chair. "However, I'm concerned about your focus. You're spending time building paper trails instead of delivering results." I felt my face flush. I was just clarifying the timeline and resource challenges. "Were you?" Victor's voice was soft, almost gentle. That made it worse. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're trying to deflect responsibility for falling behind." He leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. "The deadline is June 5th, Madeline. That's 4 days away. Where are we on deliverables?" "I've been working every night," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "The project is 90% complete." "90% isn't done," Victor said. "And done is what matters." He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. "I need this finished. No excuses." I left his office feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. I worked through 4 straight nights. My apartment became a disaster zone of empty coffee cups and takeout containers. My eyes burned from staring at screens. My back ached from hunching over my laptop. I finished the Clearwater project at 4 in the morning on June 4th. 1 day before Victor's manufactured deadline. I uploaded every deliverable to the shared drive. Presentations, financial models, client-ready proposals. Everything documented, organized, and polished. I sent an email to Victor with the subject line, "Clearwater Project, Complete." I attached a summary document showing completion dates cross-referenced with the original April timeline. I went to bed feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and vindication. Done it. Despite the sabotage, despite the impossible deadline, despite everything I'd delivered. When I woke up 6 hours later, there was no response from Victor. No acknowledgement. No thank you. Nothing. Instead, there was a calendar invite from Bethany Peters in HR. Subject: Discussion required. Time today 2 p.m. Location: Conference Room B. My hands started shaking. This was it. The meeting I'd known was coming since the moment Victor had smiled at me 6 weeks ago. I got dressed slowly, my movements mechanical. Felt numb. "Hello," like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. I drove to the office in silence, parked in my usual spot, and walked through the lobby one last time. Victor and Bethany were already seated when I arrived. The same positions as before. The same rehearsed expressions. Victor slid a folder across the table. Different folder, same cold efficiency. "Madeline," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We need to discuss your failure to meet the Clearwater deadline." I stared at him. "I submitted everything yesterday. A day early." Victor didn't blink. "The deadline was May 15th. My stomach dropped. May 15th. A full 3 weeks before even his revised timeline. "That's not," I started, but he cut me off. "Your performance has been consistently below expectations. Missed deadlines. Poor communication. Inability to manage workload without constant supervision." He pushed the folder closer. "We're terminating your employment effective immediately." I felt like the room was tilting. Bethany slid severance paperwork across the table. "You'll receive 4 weeks' pay," she said quietly. "Your benefits end at the end of the month." I looked down at the papers. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. As I signed, I noticed something. The date on Victor's performance review document was dated May 20th. 5 days after the deadline he claimed I'd missed. He'd written my termination justification before the project was even due. Victor added one final line as I stood to leave. "This isn't personal, Madeline." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I just walked out. My badge stopped working at the elevator. Security access revoked mid-afternoon, right there in front of everyone. I had to wait in the lobby while someone from IT brought down my personal items in a cardboard box. Colleagues I'd worked with for 3 years suddenly found reasons to avoid the hallway where I stood. They walked past with their eyes down, their faces carefully neutral. Only one person stopped. Keegan from accounting. He didn't say anything. He just squeezed my hand once, quickly, then kept walking. That small gesture almost broke me. I carried my box to my car, feeling the weight of eyes watching from office windows. I felt humiliated. Disposable. Like 3 years of loyalty and hard work had been erased with a signature. I drove home in a daze. I didn't cry. I felt too numb for tears. That night, I sat on my couch staring at nothing. My phone buzzed with LinkedIn notifications. People were already seeing the employment change on my profile. Some sent messages of support. Others just watched silently. Around midnight, I got up and walked to my home office. I opened my laptop and pulled up the documentation folder I'd been building. 63 files. Hundreds of pages of emails, screenshots, timelines, and evidence. I thought it would protect me. Instead, I'd been fired anyway. But as I scrolled through the files, something shifted. I wasn't looking at failure anymore. I was looking at proof. The call came 3 days later. I was sitting in my apartment in sweatpants, eating cereal for dinner and scrolling through job postings I had no energy to apply for. The number was local but unfamiliar. I almost didn't answer. Madeline Porter. The voice was professional but warm. Female. "This is Veronica Wu. I used to be director of operations at the firm. I left about 8 months ago." I remembered Veronica. Sharp, competent, always fair. She'd been one of the good ones. "I heard about your departure," she continued carefully. "And I wanted to reach out. I don't believe the story I'm hearing." Something in my chest loosened slightly. "What story are you hearing?" "That you underperformed on Clearwater. That you missed deadlines. That you couldn't handle the workload." Veronica paused. "I worked with you for 2 years, Madeline. That doesn't sound like you." I felt tears prick my eyes for the first time since being fired. "It's not the truth," I said quietly. "Can you explain what really happened?" Veronica asked. "I'm asking as someone who cares, not as someone from the company." I took a deep breath. Then I told her everything. The impossible deadline. The vanishing resources. Timeline changes. The systematic isolation. I stuck to facts. No emotions. No accusations. Just the chronological events as they'd happened. Veronica was quiet when I finished. "This isn't the first time Victor's name has come up," she finally said. "In conversations like this." Veronica's words stayed with me. I wasn't the first. That realization was both validating and horrifying. How many other people had Victor destroyed? Over the next week, I forced myself to move forward. He updated my resume. I reached out to former colleagues at other companies. I started interviewing. The first few interviews were brutal. Felt like an imposter. Like the failure Victor had tried to convince me I was. But slowly, something started to shift. Interviewers asked about my experience. I talked about projects I'd led, problems I'd solved, clients I'd managed. Away from Victor's shadow, I remembered who I actually was. 2 weeks after being fired, I got an offer. Competitor firm. Better title. Better pay. Better culture. Accepted immediately. My start date was June 26th. Exactly when the Clearwater project had originally been due. The irony wasn't lost on me. I threw myself into the new role. The difference was staggering. People responded to my emails. Meetings happened as scheduled. My manager gave clear direction and genuine support. I started sleeping through the night again. My confidence slowly rebuilt itself. I thought the chapter with Victor was closed. It survived. Moved on. I'd landed somewhere better. Then, about 6 weeks into my new job, I ran into Keegan at a coffee shop near my old office. "How are you?" he asked, and he seemed genuinely relieved to see me doing well. "Better," I said honestly. "How are things there?" Keegan's expression darkened. "Falling apart, actually." Keegan told me everything over 2 cups of coffee that turned into an hour-long conversation. After I left, Carla had taken over the Clearwater account. But Carla didn't actually know how to do the work. She'd learned the surface-level processes but none of the institutional knowledge. None of the client relationships. None of the strategic thinking that made projects succeed. The Clearwater deliverables I'd submitted were sent to the client without review. They were rejected immediately. Too generic. Missing key customizations the client had requested in conversations I'd had but never written down. Carla had tried to fix things but kept missing deadlines. Real deadlines this time. The client grew frustrated. They started questioning whether the firm could handle their account. Then other projects I'd been managing started unraveling. Timelines slipped. Clients complained. Victor's team was drowning. Leadership started asking questions, Keegan said. Why did everything fall apart after Madeline left? What were her actual responsibilities? Who approved her termination? He stirred his coffee absently. Someone requested historical project timelines. To understand what you'd actually been handling. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. They're reviewing my work. They're reviewing everything, Keegan corrected. Victor included. I drove home in silence. I wasn't happy about the chaos. I didn't want the company to fail. But I also couldn't help feeling a grim satisfaction that the truth was finally surfacing. That night I got an email. From Bethany in HR. Subject. Request for information. The email was carefully worded. Professional. Neutral. But I could read between the lines. As part of an internal review process, we're gathering documentation related to the Clearwater project timeline and resource allocation. We understand you maintained detailed records during your tenure. Would you be willing to share any relevant documentation? I stared at the email for a long time. This was the moment. Could ignore it. Delete it. Move on with my life and let Victor's empire crumble on its own. Or I could send them exactly what they were asking for. The truth. Documented and undeniable. I opened my personal cloud drive. The folder I'd created during those sleepless nights. 63 files of evidence. I didn't edit anything. I didn't add commentary or accusations. I just attached the entire folder to a response email. Per your request, please find attached all documentation from my time working on the Clearwater project. This includes original project briefs, timeline revisions, resource requests, email, correspondence, and completion records. All files are time-stamped and unedited from their original form. Please let me know if you need any clarification on the materials. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The next morning, Bethany responded immediately. Thank you for your prompt response and thorough documentation. This will be very helpful in our review process. That was all. But it was enough. The paper trail I'd built to survive was now circulating through the executive offices. Every timeline change, every ignored email, every piece of evidence showing Victor had manufactured my failure. I imagined him being asked to explain the discrepancies. The thought made me smile. 2 weeks passed. I heard nothing directly, but information leaked through the network of people who'd left the company or who still had loyalty to something beyond corporate politics. Victor had been called into a meeting with the executive team. They'd presented him with my documentation, asked him to clarify the timeline changes, the missing resource approvals, the deadline that kept shifting. He'd insisted I underperformed, that I couldn't handle pressure, that the termination was justified based on objective failure to meet expectations. Then they'd pulled up the completion records, the deliverables I'd submitted on June 4th, the email timestamps proving I'd delivered before even Victor's revised deadline. They'd compared his story to the documented facts. The dates didn't align. The narrative fell apart. According to Keegan, who heard it from someone in finance, the meeting had gotten heated. Victor had raised his voice, made accusations about my integrity, suggested I'd fabricated evidence. But you can't fabricate email server timestamps. You can't fake document revision histories. You can't manufacture a paper trail that includes correspondence from multiple people across multiple systems. The truth had a weight that Victor's lies couldn't match. An internal review was opened. Not about me. About Victor's leadership practices. About whether this was an isolated incident or part of a pattern. About whether the company had liability exposure. Victor was removed from project oversight. Temporarily, according to the official line. Everyone knew what temporarily meant. The silence around Victor became conspicuous. His name disappeared from project update emails. Team meetings happened without him. His office door stayed closed. I heard all this secondhand, through whispered conversations and careful messages from people who'd witnessed my termination and felt guilty. One person told me Victor had tried to frame the documentation review as a misunderstanding, that he'd been trying to push me to reach my potential, that tough management sometimes looked harsh in retrospect. But leadership had done something Victor hadn't counted on. They'd applied his own performance framework to his team's results. The metrics he'd used to justify firing me were now being used to evaluate his leadership. Project completion rates before and after my departure. Client satisfaction scores, team turnover, budget variance. The numbers told a damning story. Under Victor's leadership, team performance had declined. Client complaints had increased. 3 other employees had quit in the past year, all citing toxic management. The pattern was undeniable. This wasn't about one failed employee. This was about a manager who destroyed people to cover his own inadequacies. The executive team faced a choice. Admit they'd let a destructive manager operate unchecked and cost the company a competent employee. Or quietly remove the problem and hope it went away. They chose the latter. Victor was placed on administrative leave while they restructured the department. His access was suspended. His projects were reassigned. His name became something people didn't mention in meetings. I felt a strange sense of peace when I heard. Not triumph. Not vindication. Just peace. The truth had done its work. The email came on a Tuesday morning. From Victor's personal account, not his work email. Subject: Can we talk? I stared at it for several minutes before opening. Madeline, I hope this message finds you well. I've been doing some reflecting lately, and I wanted to reach out regarding how things ended between us. I think there may have been some misunderstandings about the Clearwater project timeline and expectations. I'm hoping we can have a conversation to clear things up. I believe we both want what's best for the company and for our professional reputations. Perhaps we could meet for coffee. I value your perspective and would appreciate the chance to discuss this directly. Best regards, Victor. I read it 3 times. Every word was carefully chosen. Misunderstandings instead of sabotage. Our professional reputations instead of his failure. Clear things up instead of ask me to lie for him. He wanted me to help him, to soften my story, to give him ammunition to save his career. I thought about responding. Thought about telling him exactly what I thought of his transparent manipulation. Instead, I did something more powerful. Nothing. Closed the email. I didn't reply. I didn't acknowledge receipt. I just let it sit there, unanswered, the way all my resource requests had sat unanswered when I'd needed help. Silence can be the loudest response. Victor sent 2 follow-up emails over the next week. Both went unanswered. Eventually he stopped trying. I heard later that my lack of response had been noted during his exit negotiations. That his attempt to contact me had been interpreted as witness tampering. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to engage. The official termination came quietly. No announcement. No explanation. Just Victor's name disappearing from the company directory. Bethany sent me a brief email. This message is to inform you that Victor Hale is no longer employed with the firm. As part of our ongoing commitment to workplace excellence, we've implemented new protocols for project management and performance evaluation. We apologize for any difficulties you experienced during your tenure. Your severance package has been amended to include an additional 8 weeks of pay and extended benefits coverage. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything. 8 weeks of pay. Extended benefits. That was the cost of their liability. The price they put on nearly destroying someone's career and mental health. I didn't feel angry. Felt tired. The company hadn't learned. They just removed the visible problem and hoped the wound would heal. But I also understood something important. Victor's downfall hadn't come from my anger or my accusations. It had come from simple, documented truth. I hadn't destroyed him. I just stopped absorbing his abuse. I'd stopped accepting his version of reality. I'd kept a record of what actually happened, and when people finally looked at the evidence, the truth spoke for itself. Victor had destroyed himself. I just made sure there was a record of it. The standards he'd used to measure my failure had been turned on him, and unlike me, he actually had failed. Leadership, at integrity, a basic human decency. The metrics didn't lie. Months passed. I thrived in my new role. My manager nominated me for a leadership development program. I was promoted within 6 months. Given my own team. Trusted with major clients. One afternoon, I was in a meeting with a potential client when they mentioned they'd recently left another firm. The culture there was toxic, they said. Management was more interested in politics than performance. Out of curiosity, I asked which firm. They named my old company. We had a project manager there who was excellent, the client continued. But she left suddenly. The replacement couldn't handle the work. We ended up terminating the contract. They were talking about me. About Clearwater. About the project Victor had used to try to destroy me. The woman who left, I said carefully. What was her name? Madeline something. Porter, I think. The client looked at me curiously. Why do you ask? Smiled. That's me. I'm Madeline Porter. Their eyes widened. You're the project manager from Clearwater? The one who actually understood our business. He nodded. I was terminated shortly after completing your deliverables. The work you received was mine, but I wasn't there to implement it properly. The client leaned back, processing. Well, they finally said. I think we've found the right person to work with going forward. Let's talk about moving our account to your new firm. I signed the Clearwater client that afternoon. The project Victor had tried to use to end my career became the account that launched my new one. That evening I sat in my office looking out at the city. The same view Victor used to have, from a different building. I thought about that moment 6 months ago when I'd signed my termination papers. How disposable I'd felt. How broken. I thought about the decision to document everything. To keep a record even when it felt pointless. To hold on to the truth when everyone else was rewriting it. That decision had saved me. Bethany requested a final meeting. Not at the old office but at a neutral coffee shop downtown. Professional but informal. She arrived with a leather portfolio and the same careful expression she'd worn during my termination. "Madeline," she said, sitting down across from me. "Thank you for meeting with me." Waited. "I wanted to personally apologize," Bethany continued, "for how your termination was handled. For not investigating your documentation more thoroughly when you first submitted it. For not protecting you the way HR is supposed to protect employees." She opened her portfolio and pulled out a document. "The company has completed its internal review. Victor Hale engaged in systematic performance manipulation with you and 2 other employees over the past 18 months. All 3 terminations have been classified as wrongful." She slid the document across the table. It was a formal apology letter, signed by the CEO, acknowledging that my termination was unjustified and offering a substantial financial settlement in exchange for an NDA. I looked at the number. It was significant. "We're also prepared to offer you reinstatement," Bethany said quietly. "With a promotion, compensation adjustment, reporting directly to the executive team, not to departmental management." I didn't touch the papers. "Why?" I asked. Bethany met my eyes. "Because your documentation was professional, thorough, and consistent. Because you never lied or exaggerated. Because when we reviewed everything, your version was the only one that aligned with facts. You maintained integrity even when it seemed pointless." "Thank you," I said. "But I'm not interested in returning." I signed the settlement agreement but declined the reinstatement offer. The money was substantial enough to give me financial security. The formal apology was documented proof that I'd been right. But I didn't want to go back. I'd moved forward. I found something better. Returning felt like moving backward, no matter how good the offer looked on paper. That evening I received a message from an unknown number. "I heard you declined the reinstatement. I wanted you to know I think that took courage. You deserved better than what happened. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. Keegan." His message made me smile. Small acts of kindness, even late ones, still mattered. A week later I saw a LinkedIn update. Victor Hale had added a new position. Independent consultant, leadership development and project management. I almost laughed. He was trying to rebrand his failure as expertise. Selling leadership advice after being terminated for toxic leadership. The audacity was almost impressive. But I also knew something he didn't. In industries like ours, reputations follow you. Word spreads. People who'd worked with him would warn others. Clients who'd experienced his projects would recognize his name. He could call himself whatever he wanted, but the truth would travel alongside him. I'd heard through the network that he was asking people about me. Trying to find out where I'd landed. What I was doing. Whether I was talking about what happened. The paranoia must have been eating him alive. I never mentioned his name publicly. Never wrote reviews or sent warnings. I didn't need to. The truth was already out there, spreading quietly through professional circles. My documentation had been shared during the internal review. People had seen the evidence. They'd drawn their own conclusions. 6 months after the settlement, I was leading a team meeting when my assistant knocked on the conference room door. "Sorry to interrupt," she said quietly. "You have an urgent message." I excused myself and checked my phone. An email from Victor. His 5th attempt to contact me since being terminated. This one was different from the others. Less manipulative. More desperate. "Madeline, I know I don't deserve a response. I know I handled everything wrong. The truth is, I was threatened by your competence. I saw you as a liability to my own position. I made choices I'm not proud of. I'm writing this not because I expect forgiveness or even a response. I'm writing because you deserve to know that I understand what I did. Cost you months of stress. I damaged your trust in the workplace. I nearly derailed your career because I was insecure about my own abilities. You were right to document everything. You were right to protect yourself. You were right about all of it. I hope you're doing well. You deserved better than what I gave you. Victor. I read the message twice. It was the closest thing to a genuine apology he'd ever offered. An acknowledgement of harm. An admission of motive. But it was also too late. Words couldn't undo the nights I'd stayed awake questioning my own competence. They couldn't erase the humiliation of that termination meeting. They couldn't restore the time I'd lost. I didn't delete the email this time. I saved it to a folder. Not as proof. Just as a reminder that people sometimes do recognize their mistakes, even if recognition comes too late to matter. Then I went back to my meeting. I had work to do. Important work. Work that mattered. Work where I was valued. 2 years after being fired, I was named Director of Client Strategy at my new firm. The promotion came with a corner office, a significant raise, and a team of 12 talented people who actually wanted to work with me. On my first day in the new role, I stood at my office window looking out at the city. I thought about that conference room where Victor had smiled while destroying my career. I thought about the impossible deadline designed to manufacture my failure. I thought about those sleepless nights when I'd questioned my own sanity. And I realized something important. I hadn't destroyed Victor. I'd simply stopped absorbing his abuse. I'd stopped accepting his version of reality. I'd kept a record of the truth. And when people finally looked at the evidence, it spoke for itself. The deadline that was meant to end me had become the record that ended him. His own weapon turned against him. Not through revenge or retaliation, but through simple, documented truth. I pulled up my email and found the folder where I'd saved all the documentation. 63 files that had saved my career. I didn't need them anymore. But I kept them anyway. Not as trophies. As reminders. Reminders that truth matters. That documentation protects you. That sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to participate in someone else's lies. I closed my laptop and walked back to my team meeting. I had a department to build. Career to grow. A future that belonged to me. Victor was somewhere out there, probably still trying to rebuild his reputation. But I wasn't thinking about him anymore. I was too busy succeeding.